One. Okay, awesome. And then Eric, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for this.
Awesome. Thanks, Enrique. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Eric Feldman. I am the Associate Director of FIU in Washington, D.C., reporting to you live from the D.C. area the day after inauguration. And it's my pleasure to be here to host this special edition of Honors Vote. So I have to give out a shout out to all of the Honors College colleagues on the call here, particularly Enrique and Luli, who lead the Honors Votes series of events. We did some great stuff together before the election to spur interest in voting, and this is our inauguration edition to debrief everything we went through and learned during this transition process and to understand what we still have ahead of us. So thank you to Honors for partnering with us. For those of you who might be new to what FIU in DC is all about, we operate basically three pillars of representation of the university here in Washington. Solutions is what we do to advocate with our congressional and federal agency partners on behalf of FIU's researchers who are leading programs on everything from transforming ways to teach science education and develop a cybersecurity workforce, progressing new ways to make sure that our water is clean and our environment resilient, as well as defense technologies that benefit veterans that are in need of new prosthetics, all sorts of FIU research. Our team is here to make sure that it's funded federally, that legislation that Congress is passing is informed by the new knowledge FIU researchers create. Idea exchange is the work that we do to convene not only FIU faculty and students and federal partners, but bring together those individuals as well as researchers from other universities, advocacy organizations, think tanks here in Washington to present FIU as a leader of discussion and impact in a variety of important issue areas. And the Talent Lab, that's what I'm all about. The Talent Lab is our student programs. An event like this is part of the Talent Lab. It's everything we do to make sure that our students and alumni are well trained in how DC's policy infrastructure works and how to be connected to internships and careers here in Washington. Before I introduce today's guests, I want to make sure that you all also know about an event that we have happening tomorrow. Today's event is going to look more at the transition process itself, how the actual change of power from one president to another happens. Tomorrow's event is going to be more about some specific policy areas: health, technology, and immigration. They're both going to be student speakers, three students who won a winter break essay contest in this area, as well as external guest speakers that work for advocacy organizations in these areas. We also are now announcing our Panther Alumni Week events, which are the week after next, the first week of February. So I'm pasting some links in the chat, both about tomorrow's events, as well as two events that are technology focused that are taking place as part of Panther Alumni Week. Feel free to check out those links and register for those events as well. And I also cannot be hosting an event without mentioning that we do have applications open for two fly-in policy seminars. One of them is virtual, one of them, the format is to be determined. The topics very quickly are women in politics and policy, as well as environmental resilience for
the coaches. And then the coaches would then start their own connect groups after they went through that process over an 8-week period. And not all coaches were.
All right, got that meeting out of the way. So you can visit flyin.fiu.edu to make sure that you can see the full details of what these topics are about and how to apply to them. So be sure to check that out. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. First and foremost, we have Livi Logan-Wood, who's the Associate Manager for the Center for Presidential Transition, which is a unit within the organization here based in Washington, the Partnership for Public Service, which is focused on partnering with the federal government to make it more efficient and effective. We have Dr. Frank Mora, who's a professor of Politics and International Relations at our very own Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. And he also serves on one of the agency reviews teams for the Department of Defense, specifically in the current presidential transition process, which we'll learn more about, as well as my colleague Sabrina Roselle, who's part of our governmental relations team and has been tracking the presidential transition for a few months now and how it affects FIU and our own internal governmental relations priorities. So to all three of you, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
So to get started, I have kind of just an overview question that I would love the reflection from all three of you on. And this is really big picture reflections on how this election and transition went. You could think about it in terms of things you might have even personally learned. So for example, a month or so ago, there was a lot in the news about how the General Services Administration has to ascertain the result of an election in order for the transition to start, which is different than the Electoral College casting their votes or Congress certifying those votes. To professionals in the field like you all, maybe you're already familiar with that process, but maybe at least since 2000, when there was another close call election, the general public, myself included, maybe was not aware of nuances of process like that. So it doesn't have to be on that specific thing, but what's something that was surprising during this transition, something that you personally learned because it hadn't been in the spotlight before, and how did the way this all played out affect your role in all this and in your organization's work? In any order, actually, I'm gonna ask Livi to go first as our external guest who was kind enough to join the FIU community today.
Yeah, so first off, I want to say thank you to Eric and all of you having me here. It's an honor to be on such a distinguished panel with Dr. Mora and Sabrina. And we often host interns at the partnership, so it's been a great experience getting to know FIU through them as well. For me, I think there was so much this transition period that stands out, but two takeaways that I had are just the critical nature that early planning, the role that early planning plays in a successful transition. I think we at the partnership always emphasize this to candidates to start planning in springtime, even before a nominee is named. And that doesn't always happen. So the Biden team did that. And I think despite obstacles that they encountered throughout the process post-election, that early planning really paid off. And then you touched on this, Eric, but I think the biggest glaring piece that came out of this past election cycle is the need for legislative reform around ascertainment in particular. There's so much around resources and funding that's tied to ascertainment. And it's actually a pretty vague legislative wording around that issue. So I'd love to talk about that more. But that was really central to kind of what the partnership in the center did post-election, was try to raise public awareness around the importance of ascertaining the election, even if the Trump administration had within their right to pursue legal challenges. Ascertainment was critical for the Biden-Harris team to begin their work. And I'm sure Dr. Mora, you could probably speak more about how that affected you as well.
And for any students who might not have followed that line of news articles closely, correct me if I'm wrong about anything here, Livi. Ascertainment is a totally different process from the certification of actually who won the election. So there's one line of things happening where the Electoral College and then Congress actually certify these are the people who got the most votes. But on a totally separate timeline, if you will, there is money the federal government has to make sure that whoever won an election has the resources to come into office and have some stuff ready to go. So there's money there. In order for that to happen without the government stopping, it has to happen before the election results are certified. So there's someone in the government who uses some sort of subjective judgment to say, hey, it seems like this person won, to a certain enough degree that we can start giving them the money to start the transition. That's basically what happened?
Yeah, that is. And I think zooming out just a little bit, it's important to note that the GSA, the General Services Administration, is tasked with ensuring all legislative requirements pre-election, post-election, and post-inauguration are implemented around presidential transition. So that's really why the power around ascertainment lies with the GSA administrator. And so by ascertaining the election, it has been in the past seen as a foresight into what the election outcome will be with the Electoral College and so forth. However, really the result that we saw was the fact that there are over 15 enormous action items tied to ascertainment for the transition team, some of which are access to agency career officials who've been planning for months and months and months to welcome a transition team, specific funding for the transition team, I think additional equipment and federal software, which is important for cybersecurity purposes. I could go on, but the Biden-Harris team was not able to access that until several weeks after major networks called the election. And I can go in later around how here at the partnership, we released a statement encouraging the Trump administration and specifically Emily Murphy to ascertain the election. And I can share a little bit about why we determined there was a clear outcome of the election later.
Awesome, thank you. Before I have Dr. Mora answer, I do want to address how question and answer will work in here. So I'm going to encourage students who have questions to type them into the chat at any time. In no more than half an hour, it's going to turn completely to question and answers. But if you have a question that is very pertinent or relevant or interesting, I might even get to questions earlier than that. We will have you ask the question over video so our panelists and guests can see and hear your great questions. Though type them into the chat so that I know that you have them and can turn it over to you when the time's right. Dr. Mora, big picture reflections on the process, anything you learned about how this all works?
Well, first of all, Eric, thank you so much for welcoming me back. I was on sabbatical during the fall semester, and now I'm back teaching, and this is my first sort of public event with FIU since my sabbatical. So, and excited to talk a little bit about my experience in the transition, right? So I think Livi did a very good job of setting the sort of what is ascertainment and the challenges we sort of met. I was invited to join the transition in October. I had been working on the campaign since the summer here in South Florida. And then in October, I was honored to be invited and participate in the transition, as you said, to be a member of the agency review team at the Department of Defense. On the 6th or the 7th of November, I traveled from here to DC via car to sort of start the work. My expectation was that we would get ascertainment around the time that I was arriving or soon thereafter. And that didn't happen, as we know. We didn't get ascertainment. That is to say, we couldn't do our job until about, and Livi can correct me, just a little before Thanksgiving. We were a team of about 24 or 25 people. The team was led by Kath Hicks, who is now, as you know, been nominated to be the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And so with that limitation, we had to interview folks, sort of external folks who had been formerly in the department, who had left the department not too long ago, but had served in the Trump administration. Because again, we did not have access. Not only did we not have the resources, we simply did not have access to anyone, to the building, to anyone in the building, any information about the building. And this, I think, is critical. And then President-elect Biden sort of explained the challenges that on issues of national security, it was vitally important that the new team get as much information and access to individuals involved in operational aspects and policy aspects, but that didn't happen. So that's the work we were doing. There was, of course, a second limitation that we had, which is COVID, and I'll get to that in a second. When we finally did get ascertainment and we started going to the building and interviewing folks, there was a special wrinkle, a unique wrinkle that Livi may also know about, which is that we had minders in our meetings. The general counsel always assigned an individual to come into our meetings and take notes about those meetings. Now, why is this important? This is important because it has a tendency to make people more cautious in what they say. right? Whether it was civilians or military. Although in talking to US military commanders, the 3 and 4 stars, they didn't seem to care. There was a minder and they just said what they wanted. But for much of the other people, there was sort of a cautiousness, and that's unproductive, right? That's very unproductive, because we need sort of an open, frank discussion, being forthcoming with all the details that we needed to be able to just walk in the first day, the new team be able to walk in the first time and start doing the job and give continuity and change to the things that we're doing. Well, that was not enough. Around December 20, a little before Christmas, once again, we got news that they closed the door on us again, or for the first time, I suppose. And so we were denied, once again, access to the building, access to additional folks that we wanted to interview, and information. The explanation given by the Department of Defense, by the leadership of the Department of Defense, was that they didn't have bandwidth. So I remind people, I used to work in the Department of Defense during the Obama administration, and the Department of Defense has the bandwidth to do a lot of things at the same time, and certainly being able to accommodate a team of 25 people should not have been a problem. But the doors were closed, and at that point, the president-elect gave a press conference, as some of you may recall, in which he called on the Trump administration to stop obstructing some of his teams, and he called out the Department of Defense as one of those areas where the staff there, the political staff, was being incredibly uncooperative. There is an article that came out in the last couple of days in Politico that goes into greater detail about the challenges we were faced with the Department of Defense during the transition. You know, we had to, in the course of the time that I was in Washington, we had to write constantly reports and memos to Central Transition about the work we were doing, preparing, sort of accumulating documents so that the new team can read those and be prepared to take those documents, at least from my perspective, weren't as rich as they could have been and they should have been. And now we are finding out, as the Politico article says, that the challenges in the department are much deeper, are much more problematic than we initially thought. Listen, I'm not trying to be partisan here. I'm just trying to give as objective a layout as to what I faced and others faced as we tried to make sense of what the situation was in the Pentagon. And at the end of the day, my feeling is that we were denied information, right? We were not given the information. Meetings were canceled at times. There were just a number of challenges. Nevertheless, Eric, and I'll finish with this, to your initial question, I learned a lot about this process, both working in a very constrained environment, either because of COVID or because of the obstruction of the administration. And I just want to echo something that Livi said, which I think is very important. I was not directly involved in the Obama transition, but was sort of relatively close to it. And I thought that was a relatively well-run transition. I have to say that with all the limitations, the Biden-Harris transition was extraordinary. And in large part because of what Livi said. They started in June or July of last year, creating structure, creating processes and personnel to be ready on day one after ascertainment to do its work. And again, despite the limitations, I think we were able to do collect what we needed, or much of what we needed, I think, for the next team to get the ball rolling. So with that, let me turn it over back to you, and certainly open to any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Mora, for what is probably the most insider view of what some of the members of the transition teams faced, more so than what we've even seen in media and things like that. We appreciate having your insider thoughts there. So the last person that I'll collect a reflection on being my colleague Sabrina, and then we'll move forward to what happens next. Sabrina, what have you been going through?
Well, first, thank you to all the panelists that have joined us. It's exciting to have this conversation. And to the point of reflection, this is certainly the first election that I have observed this closely. And being someone who's relatively newer in my profession, this was an exciting process. I simply never understood the complexities of what goes into a transition process, from the role that Dr. Mora played on an agency review team. These were all foreign concepts to me, and being able to understand the inner workings of a transition just made me had a more profound appreciation for what our government does. I think that one of the greatest takeaways for me was just being able to dig deep and understand who the key players were throughout the transition, to take a look at the agency review teams and see what type of experts were being tapped on, how were those experts identified, and what was the outcome of the expertise that they ended up bringing to the table ultimately. So it's really exciting to kind of see this process unfold. And I want to encourage any of the students that are on here to really just take a look at that back end, that front end work that was really done to take us to this point. I think that one day after our inauguration, that there's definitely a lot on the docket to be done. But I'm really excited for what's ahead. And again, I want to thank the panelists that have joined us today, because they're the ones that have been in the thick of this for quite some time.
Thanks, Sabrina. So I actually was just looking for an online resource that could help our students understand an agency review team's purpose a little better, since they got to hear about one of our own Panther colleagues that served on one. And as I should not have been surprised, a great resource comes from Livi's organization, the Center for Presidential Transition, somewhat directed towards the transition teams themselves of how to be most effective, but certainly kind of an interesting insider look at what these teams should be doing and what Livi's organization suggests that they do to be successful. So Livi, back to you for a little. We talked about, this has all been reflective. So looking forward now, the new people who have been appointed, who will be appointed, and who will be hired into civil service positions as well, have a lot of work to do to implement policy priorities. You and I were discussing a series of news articles yesterday that on one hand suggest that some issues with civil service itself, the hiring processes and benefits of federal employees have to be tackled first so that they can be effective in their jobs, but also with major issues looming like the pandemic, it's going to be harder to prioritize some of those changes, because the American public wants to hear, the pandemic's under control before, the civil service is under control. So what in the partnership's view, what are the pressing issues with the civil service? We've been seeing in the news some career employees being transitioned to political roles where they're easier to fire. I've also been seeing in the news some people who are in political roles transitioning to career roles before the transition, so they're harder to fire. What are the big problems, and how should they be prioritized in the other issues that we're facing? How do we get Americans to care about federal government employees?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. This is a great question and really gets to the heart of the work that the overall Partnership for Public Service advocates for, which is we are nonpartisan, we're a nonprofit, and we really focus on the management of government. So how is government created to effectively institute policies quickly and at a with great impact? And so I think you touched on something that is definitely still on the radar of the partnership and may not be on the radar of other folks on this call, has to do with an executive order that the Trump administration released during transition, or right before the transition period, called Schedule F. And this was I think from the partnership's view, an attempt to kind of dismantle the career workforce in a way that would allow, so the career civil servants, there are millions in this country, they are protected by unions. There are, and that is really to make sure that these positions are not politicized from administration to administration. And so Schedule F has to do with creating a whole new category for public servants that would allow people to be effectively fired easier, but it makes them more political appointees. So, and they're stripped of their standard procedures that apply to federal hiring, so people could be hired more quickly into federal or Schedule F, and so and make them at-will employees. And so this gets back to kind of something I think I do want to say that I think the Biden administration, with their ability to release 17 executive orders yesterday, has proved that they are multitasking, they're focusing on many issues, they have multiple priorities, but some of the ones that we named yesterday at the partnership have to do with kind of this issue of Schedule F, but also something that we are continue to advocate for is emphasizing this call to service for specifically young people. Around only 6% of the federal workforce in career positions are under the age of 30. And most of them are eligible for retirement in the next 10 years. And so I think that this new administration, I've already seen more energy from my peers and people around the country who want to join this administration, but that's something that we really advocate for. We also wanted to emphasize a focus on collaboration. So I think a lot of the impact that the federal government can have relies on the working relationships of interagency efforts. And so the lack of effective communication and coordination has been evident in the rollout of some of the vaccines and how we're treating this pandemic. And so that harkens back to the management of government that we've kind of talked about already. And lastly, I think you touched on this perfectly, Eric, the prioritization of modernizing the federal government should be central. A lot of the technology that exists for people and the procedures in place to hire individuals are very outdated and backlogged. And so focusing on that can really help assuage some of these issues and make our government a more attractive place to work. For example, if it takes over a year to get a background check cleared, or a security clearance, that leaves a huge gap for young people to find different employment. And so those are some of the thoughts I have around what this new administration, it would be ideal if they focus on early, because it will help implement policy, quite frankly, for them, but also make the federal government more effective.
Thank you. Two important links that I just dropped in the chat. I have to mention that the Partnership for Public Service, where Livi works, has the public service internship program. She mentioned that we have FIU students intern at her organization every semester. Those applications are currently open for summer, so you can click on that public service internship program link to be one of our next cohort of interns that work with Livi and her colleagues. And also, since you mentioned people wanting to work for the administration itself, for the government, her organization hosts this great website, Ready to Serve, that briefs individuals on how to secure positions that are politically appointed, whether that's still for this time around or as you're preparing yourself for a future post-election situation. For anyone who feels they have an insight to answer here, what role does the legislative branch play in this transition? So as we're watching the news about the two new senators from Georgia that were just sworn in, and the balance of which party controls the House and Senate, which are both Democrats at the moment, with the Senate being a 50-50 split. So that's my main question here being, is that separate news? Is the presidential transition one thing, and what's going on in the legislature and the Senate a separate story that people should also follow because it's the government? Or is that directly affecting what the incoming administration can do in some way?
So I'll say a couple of things. I'm sure Livi has a lot more. So again, ascertainment was a challenge for us, but we were also interested in having conversations with staff on the Hill to get a sense of what the things they were interested in, what are the concerns that they had. And we wanted to talk to both sides, Democrats and Republicans. For quite a long time, the Republican staff would not speak to us. So we only had sort of the Democratic staff. And part of the job of the agency review team, Eric, is also to prepare the designee, the secretary designee, as he or she, in my case, it was General Austin, prepare him for his confirmation hearing at the Senate Armed Services Committee. And so there was a lot of work that went into sort of feeding him information on, you just can't imagine the number of issues that the secretaries designees have to sort of digest. And so that was a process that we worked with, and that was informed by our conversations with the Hill. But other than that, and again, Livi can answer more, but other than that, there was no sort of interaction. It wasn't, the Congress wasn't sort of directly supporting, or members weren't directly involved or supporting the transition. I think those two, in that sense, the two were very separate, and that's a sort of different news story to follow. But there was some interaction, and particularly the closer we got to having a designee, and once we got a designee, we certainly relied on talking to staff and helping us get our nominee up and ready to go. Over.
I might just also add the importance that personnel plays in presidential transition, and the Biden administration is setting out to confirm 4,000 political appointees, and around 1,200 must receive Senate confirmation. And so for that reason, we were really tracking the Georgia elections closely, because having a slight majority in the Senate could help expedite some of the confirmations. Now, since there was a special election, I think that did delay getting some cabinet members into their spots by day one. However, we anticipate that because of the majority, the slight majority, the Biden administration will receive much more success in confirming their nominees. And I would also just say in history, most cabinet nominees are confirmed quickly. So of the 85 initial cabinet nominees submitted to the Senate by the past 6 administrations, only 1 has been voted down, and only 4 have been withdrawn. And Bush, who had a similar situation, President Bush had a similar situation to Biden, was able to confirm all of his nominees in a timely manner. So I think beyond the policy implications of having the Senate, the Biden administration will be able to put more people in place faster, which is critical to an effective transition.
And really quick, just to add to that point, Livi just hit on this, but the last time that we saw this 50-50 split was in 2001. So I think that this is a very interesting time, and given that the Biden administration has really declared a message of unity, I think now more than ever, especially in the Senate, we're going to see whether it's a desired bipartisanship or not. There's definitely going to have to be bipartisanship. And I think that moderate leaders are going to be ones to emerge and be the ones that are going to have to broker the deals. But I think that this is going to produce a very positive outcome moving forward.
Okay, thank you all. I do want to prioritize student questions, so I'm gonna take the 2 we have. Then I'm gonna have Sabrina share some information, and we'll go back to more questions. So keep the questions coming. Jacob, are you available to use audio and video to ask your question to the panel?
Yes. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. How can the current transition team mitigate with independent agencies like the Social Security Administration, where the administration has limitations towards replacing leadership positions just because they're independent executive agencies?
Anyone can speak to that? I think so. So Jacob, you're asking maybe the difference between a cabinet level, a cabinet agency, and a
So as many of you know, there's positions that serve under the pleasure of the president. But in the case of Social Security, the commissioner has a 6-year term, right? and he goes to the Senate, and there's a president that nominates him. But you still have policies that were left over from the previous administration in these independent executive agencies. Just recently, today, I believe on the National Labor Board, the general counsel didn't want to resign after Biden asked him to resign. So then, he was basically fired. So what implications can this have if we just start firing people that don't want to practically resign or
Dr. Mora, do you have thoughts on this? I think this is a big part of why the agency review team having access and being able to get in those agencies is important.
There is something about this particular transition. So for example, in the Obama transition, in some of these positions, and not the ones that Jacob was mentioning, but even ones that are more directly dependent on the executive, you saw that the Obama administration kept a lot of holdovers. You found that some Bush administration folks were there for 6 months, a year even, right, before a replacement came in. That is not the case here. The Biden-Harris team from day one, or prior to day one, seemed like they had a clear list of people that they wanted to make sure that were no longer in their positions on January 21st. So you've seen, just to give you one example, a very small example, but in radio and TV Marti, sort of that part of the International Broadcasting Bureau of the State Department, US government, in 2009, the director, a gentleman by the name of Pedro Roy, an appointee by the Bush administration, was in his job for 18 months before he was replaced. Today, the director of TV and Radio Marti, the Trump appointment, submitted his resignation today, and he's no longer there. And we're seeing that throughout the bureaucracy. There's a number of acting positions, even at the cabinet level. State Department, there's an acting secretary. The Department of Defense has got an acting secretary because of the relative slowness in which these people are being confirmed. So there have been some of those things, but the sense was from the very beginning in terms of personnel, the administration or the transition wanted to move very quickly on non-confirmable political appointees. So you see a number of folks that don't require confirmation are now already close to sitting in their chair. That is, for its speed, it's unprecedented. I'll give you another example. When I joined the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Western Hemisphere, I did not start my job until April, right? The whole vetting and the whole process didn't sort of come together until April. The person that's going to sit in my old job will be in his job next week. That's very, very quick, right? And so there is a sort of, during the transition, a strong focus on addressing and moving people from a personnel perspective into their jobs as quickly as possible so they can start implementing the president's agenda or priorities. Now, those that require confirmation, that's a little different story. It's going to take a little longer because it requires the Senate to do its work. So they're taking a bit more time with those jobs. So the focus has been at the cabinet and sub-cabinet level, and then at the bottom, the political appointees that are now either sitting in their chairs or about to sit in their chairs in the next week. That is, Livi can maybe say, but that is sort of record speed as far as I'm concerned.
It absolutely is record speed. I was excited to bring some of that to this conversation, but just super quickly, despite all the delay and the virtual nature of everything, and you can all imagine how hard it must have been to virtually vet so many people, make sure they were fit to serve. The Biden team has set the record for the most Senate confirmed nominees announced. So they announced 52 before Inauguration Day. The next was the Obama administration, who announced 42. And they have also really set a standard for White House political appointee announcements. They've announced 233. The second most was Obama with 88. So I think, you know, what the center has always messaged is like personnel, personnel, personnel. If you focus on that early, there is opportunity to get into to be successful. And I think the Biden-Harris team has definitely showed that. So I just want to echo the sentiment that Dr. Mora said.
Chloe, you had a quick question that kind of ties right into this, the logistical process of reviewing all of these candidates.
Yes, I did. Hello, everyone. I was asking, and this is probably already being done, but are there initiatives to include completely virtual, essentially Zoom hearings for the Senate to confirm these presidential appointments?
So yes, some of them are occurring over WebEx from what I've heard, or have been scheduled in that way. I think it's important to note that at the partnership, we are advocating for the amount of people who require Senate confirmation to be lessened. And we're not talking about positions like cabinet nominees. We're not talking about even the second highest level serving political appointee officers. There, if you look at the list of 1,100 to 1,200 Senate confirmed positions, many of them are not political, and many of them have to do with the management and function of organizations. And given recent years, the partnership released a research last year that measured how slowly the Senate has been confirming people since the Reagan administration, and it just is a huge task to do at the way that our current legislative branch is operating. And so I'll pop that in the chat, but I think there are plans to do that. However, 17 Senate committees are responsible for confirming nominees, but the bulk of nominees are only confirmed through 3 or 4. So even though it's kind of spread out across the Senate, it gets really centralized where there are hundreds of people who are sitting in the same committee and have to wait kind of their turn. And then I would also say most people do get confirmed. It's just a matter of a waiting game. I don't know if any other panelists want to add to this kind of discussion on just the Senate confirmation process overall.
If not, I'll highlight that I did earlier put a link that explains independent agencies, because I think that I didn't know the difference between independent agencies and other types of federal agencies like cabinet level ones before moving to DC. And so I find this kind of nuance fascinating for those in the audience who might want to read about the different levels of control the president has over different types of federal agencies. I am going to turn it over for a little bit to my colleague, Sabrina. And Sabrina, my question for you, and I know you have some slides you're welcome to share in responses. How does all of this matter to FIU, and what have you been doing to help FIU through all this?
Well, I will say it's been a busy few months, and in a moment I'm going to share my screen. But just to give you a holistic overview of what this entire transition process means for us as a university, I think it's twofold. It's one, identifying what are the policy objectives of this administration. How does that tie back to the university? And what can we as a governmental relations team do to articulate that back to our researchers, to our faculty, to our staff, everyone in our university that would be impacted by any of these changes that have come about given the new administration. And the second part is identifying the key players that will be within the Biden administration, whether they're political appointees or cabinet secretaries. We're tracking all these names and identifying, even if there might be someone that has a relation to the state of Florida. Those are all small details that can give us an opportunity to position our university as a national player, which we have done under previous administrations. So just to give you a little bit of a visual of what we're doing, I won't go into great detail with these slides, just given the time constraints. But this is how we have kind of modeled our transition preparation that we showcase to university stakeholders. We kind of walk teams through what to expect, and we've broken down the administration's priorities. First, what are the pandemic priorities? I think that that's the unavoidable conversation that needs to be had. What is going to be done due to COVID-19? And the following piece to that is the pandemic adjacent. What is the long-term plan outside of immediately addressing the needs that have come about because of COVID? And there's other non-pandemic related priorities that the administration has set forth that we as an institution need to monitor. So these are some of the immediate known relevant priorities. Higher education is clearly important to us. We are a higher education institution, and these are the different aspects of the Biden administration that we've been tracking, whether that's been the paused student loans, the possibility of having student loans forgiven. We are a minority serving institution, and that's something for us to track, given that the administration has expressed a desire to up their support for research facilities within minority serving institutions. And I want to spend a minute talking about our preeminent research areas and how we've divided up what the administration plans to do and populated this information in such a way that makes sense for our research priorities as FIU. So an example of this is environmental resilience. This is something that we have declared ourselves an expert in as an institution. We have various aspects of our university, various aspects of research that really fall under that. Just to give you one example, we have our Extreme Events Institute, which is located in our engineering campus. If you've seen our wall of wind, you know that that's one impressive aspect of what we do with our engineering college. And the research that we do there really relates back to our relationships at the federal level, because it's a facility that's utilized to test the impact of hurricanes on building infrastructure. So the capacity of that specific location really is what makes us a national player in that specific area. So that's just to give you an example of how we take our preeminent areas, which again are these areas of expertise, and raise our profile on this federal level. So then we've taken a look at what the Biden administration plans to do in these respective areas, put them in a list, and we provide our senior administration within our institution with an overview of what to expect, what to anticipate. And this is critical for some of our researchers that do receive grant dollars, that do rely heavily on the policy that's being instituted at the federal level. So these are just the breakdowns. And now I want to just take this further and talk about the players, right? So I had mentioned the players in here. I've put pictures of the players, and don't worry, I'll get to the actual names. But this is how we break down the different agencies that are relevant to our areas of expertise. And here you'll see this even further in environmental resilience and some of the other areas that we're also an expert in. So what can you do? I go back to this idea of knowing the players. It's absolutely important for us as individuals who are interested in this political process to be engaged and know who the Biden administration is putting into power to lead these agencies. At the end of the day, the president is just one aspect of our government. His cabinet is absolutely critical to taking out what he has promised and really moving that forward. So I made this slide, and if you're on and you want to screenshot this, I encourage you to do so. You can also Google this and see these names, match them with the faces. But it's really important to be able to start familiarizing yourself, because you'll start to notice that as you read the news and you might be reading something about defense and you see the name Lloyd Austin, now you'll know who that player is and you'll be able to start connecting the dots. I always jokingly like to say that this is really a game of connecting the dots. And as an institution, that's exactly what we do. We identify what's going on federally. How can we connect that to what we're doing as an institution to really take us to the next level? And here I detailed a couple ways that you can stay connected, that you can stay engaged. This is a behemoth of a process. And as some of our speakers have alluded to, there's a lot of nuances to understand. But there's some basic things that you can do just to stay engaged, because now that we've passed this election cycle process, civic engagement is usually at an all-time high at that point, and it usually starts to die down as the administration continues to work until you approach another election cycle. But I want to challenge each of you to really stay connected, because this is where the change happens. This is where the work is going to be done. So confirmation hearings is one step. A student just asked a question about that. and confirmation hearings for these secretaries are available. This morning, I was watching the confirmation hearing for soon-to-be Secretary Buttigieg, and it was a very interesting hearing because you hear the hard questions that are being asked, and that's where the different nuances of the specifics of what they plan to do are divulged as they're being asked in an interrogation style setting in their hearings. The next part is FIU and DC. We have prepared a document that really details what I had just mentioned to you about the policy aspect. You can feel free to stay connected with us and we can get that in your hands, but we're really here to be a resource just to keep you guys educated on this process. And the last piece, which might sound a little bit basic and a little too simple, but I promise you it's a great resource that I rely on as a professional in this field. It's the White House website. Presidential Actions tab. That is your go-to where you're going to see all the executive orders. You're going to be able to track all this information in absolute detail and be able to stay up to date. You don't need to rely on any specific news source to tell you what's going on. You can go straight to the White House website and you'll know exactly what the administration is up to. So this is what FIU has been up to. And again, I just want to stress that we're here to be a resource in however you see fit. So please feel free to reach out to us.
Thanks, Sabrina. That was awesome. And I want to take a quick second just to highlight that the job that you're describing that you do is not just this one-off job that you happen to have at FIU, but the career of governmental relations is a robust and fascinating one. So anyone on this call who might already follow the news and have a reaction like, hey, Pete Buttigieg is going to be Secretary of Transportation, that's interesting news. And you would like to get paid as a career to follow news like that and figure out how it affects the institution that you might be working for. That could be a very rewarding career. We've been building a lot of resources around DC-based careers into a Canvas-based free online course called DC Ready. I put my email in the chat if people want to chat about doing a job like Sabrina's for any number of organizations here in Washington, or internships and careers in general. Feel free to reach out to me, especially if we have not connected previously. So we have 2 questions and 5 minutes. I believe in us as a team, we can get through this. So I'm going to go to Lázaro and then Francisco, ask them both to ask their questions quickly, and then our panelists to give somewhat brief answers to those questions. Lázaro, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to this semester before you ask that question?
Hi, everyone. My name's Lázaro Bosch. I'm one of the FIU and DC's Hamilton Scholars for the spring 2021 term. I just wrapped up this fall a communications internship with NASA in their communications department. And this semester, I'm working with a lobbying firm with a focus on health. And my question, I think is more for Livi, because something resonated on some of the parts of this call today, was that 6% of my generation, I'm a Generation Z, in general, a younger generation, works for these government agencies. And how has the transition team been facing challenges? As we heard in President Biden's inaugural address yesterday, he wanted specifically to change the ideas of truth and relationship with the press. And I think we saw in last night's press conference, being the first one on the first day, that was also historic. So what is the steps that the team is taking in order to instill trust that has lost a lot of trust, especially in my generation?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It might even be the $1 million question that the Biden administration is probably still seeking answers to. A few things I might add is, I think, and Dr. Mora, you could also speak to this. However, I think the transition team in itself, when you look at it, when you look at the agency review team, when you look at the staff that had worked on the team since being named in June, it is an incredibly diverse transition team in age, background, political leanings. There was a lot of progressives who were tapped to be a part of that transition team. And I took that personally as a signal in an effort to rebuild kind of this idea that public service is respected. Public service, we want people from all backgrounds, from all voices to come and serve in the government, whether that's in a political appointment or a career position. And so I knew people who were my age who had the pleasure of serving on this transition team, where in the past the staff may not have been quite as young or diverse. The other thing I would also say, in harping back to what I kind of talked about, is just making it easier to get into the federal government. I think that their communication plan and how they rolled out how to apply for a political appointment is better than we've ever seen in a virtual setting. So it was a common form. They're going through that. And then I also think, just making the process to get hired easier and more transparent, because I think it is incredibly complicated. And in a world where we're used to having all the information about the position description ready for us, where we know what the salary is right away, where we can just get all that info quickly, I think it's daunting to try to embark on a new job where the whole process just seems incredibly complex and complicated. So I'll stop there, but I do love this question, and also it's great that you are at NASA. Huge props for that agency.
Thank you,
and the
Livy.
work.
And I think your answer resonates with me as well. As Eric and Carlo just mentioned, I'm actually here at the FIU in DC office here in Washington, D.C. This past long weekend, MLK weekend, I made the leap of faith and moved to DC to pursue my final semester, and I hope to continue and in public service, civil service, just like you have expressed. So thank you again, as always, to FIU in DC. And for anyone who hasn't worked with FIU in DC, being a Hamilton Scholar, I definitely can vouch that this is a great opportunity to continue on a path like Sabrina did and like I have, and Chloe and other DC interns. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out to the team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Laz. I put a lot of links in the chat over the past hour about how to stay engaged with us, including my own email. So please listen to Laz. Francisco, can you round us out with our last question for the day?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Francisco Sanguino. I'm a sophomore here at FIU. I'm studying political science. And my question has more to do with like the bigger picture of the Biden administration. I think we could say that they're somewhat, considering their calls for unity and bipartisanship, they want to be like the uniting figure to bring us back again, I guess. So considering this call for bipartisanship at the legislative level, how big of a role do you think moderates such as Joe Manchin and Susan Collins will play in achieving this? And also, how can the new administration adequately achieve their goals without sacrificing their substance and without furthering the political divide in the US? That's it.
I guess that's more a political question. So Livy, I'll take that one first. Apologize for the noise in the background. So Francisco, that answer requires, right, Eric, about 30 minutes. So I have 30 minutes, is that right? Okay, great, thank you. It's a good question. It's a complicated question, but you're right. When you have a Senate that's 50-50, every vote counts. And Joe Manchin, a Democrat, part of the 50 majority, if you will, who's quite moderate on a number of issues. It will be important. He is now the most important person in the Senate, right? It's not the vice president. It's not even the majority leader. It's Joe Manchin. So try to maintain those 50 votes will be a challenge, but there's a bigger challenge. And I think this is what the president was trying to get at, which is in a lot of issues, a lot of legislation, for example, immigration, you don't just need a majority, you need 60 votes as part of the procedure to get laws passed. And I think what the president was trying to say, Francisco, is that the task in front of us, the enormous challenge in front of us, whether it is COVID, whether it is climate change, whether it is the issue of economic stagnation, whether it's the issue of the crisis of democratic governance. I mean, I don't know what other president other than Franklin Delano Roosevelt is walking into so many challenges. And at the end of the day, if there isn't bipartisanship, we're not going to be able to address these problems. The advantage that FDR had in 1932 or 1933 when he came into office is that Democrats won overwhelmingly. I mean, beyond 60, I think they had like 67 or 68 the 2/3 of the senators, and an overwhelming majority in the House, it's easier to get things done, but that's not the case here. So it's much more challenging at a time where I would argue we are more polarized than we've ever been probably since the 1930s. So unless we sort of overcome, we try to depolarize our politics, if we try to sort of get an appreciation of the challenge in front of us, and therefore work together to address those challenges, there is much more at stake than the failure of immigration reform. There is much more at stake than the issue of COVID. And I'm not one for people who know me to engage in hyperbole, but I think our democracy is at stake if we don't get through these issues. So I always like to end discussion on a pessimistic note. So I will turn it over to Eric, who I know will have something very positive to say. And Eric, please make sure to tell Carlos that I behaved myself.
Carlos is here watching, so he knows for himself whether you
Carlos is here. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yourself or not. And I was hoping you were going to end on a positive note there. So my note of optimism, and if any of the other two panelists want to add theirs, is mine's very institutional and personal and a little biased. Lazaro is one of our 11 Hamilton scholars for this semester and one of about 25 FIU students interning in DC in some capacity, including virtually. We saw what we saw a few weeks ago in DC, and the very next day after that, we hosted our virtual orientation session for all incoming DC interns. And I know that each one of our FIU and DC interns, regardless of their political party, because they're usually split every semester pretty evenly, is pursuing the internship opportunities and future career opportunities that they are because they want to engage in this process constructively. They want to know how it works. They want to advocate for their causes and communities. So it's hard to be not optimistic when my job every day is to help our FIU students and alumni make the impact that they want to make here, and they're making it. So, that being said, if either Livi or Sabrina have anything optimistic to counter that, though Dr. Mora obviously right about the collaboration needing to be figured out among the parties. So I wouldn't even call it pessimistic. I'll invite them to do so, and I'll go ahead before those comments and thank all three of you for participating, thank all of the students for their questions, and remind everyone that they can reach out to me if they have any questions about the programs that I've highlighted, the Hamilton Scholars or fly-ins, or even tomorrow's event that will focus on health, tech, and immigration. If you want to go from this procedural discussion today to a more policy topical discussion tomorrow. Livi, Sabrina, optimism to leave us with?
I can just very quickly say, for one, thank you so much. I've loved being on this panel and talking about this issue. If any students want to connect with me, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to chat more. I think if we zoom in super close on a transition topic about optimism, I just, in a very nonpartisan observation, what the Biden-Harris transition team accomplished over the past year is going to set the standard for presidential transition for every administration moving forward. And they really paved a lot of innovations working remotely and made processes work, and tapped incredibly smart and qualified people to lead it. And so I'm excited about that. And I think we at the partnership say that transition indicates how effective an administration will be. And so I'm excited to see what comes of that.
And another note of optimism, I just think that this is an exciting time to be engaged and to really track everything. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a presidential transition. Now's the time for us as the next generation to just really be locked in and to understand what our elected leaders are up to. So if anything, I hope that this encouraged you to dig a little deeper, to look a little closer to what's being done from a policy perspective and who are the players. So that's my note of optimism.
Great, thank you all again, and I'll see some of you at tomorrow's events. Have a great afternoon.
Before we leave, just really quick reminder, I just want to say on behalf of the Honors College, thank you so much to Livi, Francisco, Sabrina, Eric for putting this together. And just want to say another shout out for tomorrow's event, which I think 4 of our students actually got selected and applied to the Biden-Harris transition policy competition that FIU and DC did. So just a quick reminder for anybody who's listening, also take a look at your emails if you want some more info on the event that's happening tomorrow. But it's going to be happening at 11 a.m. on Zoom, and you can go to go.fiu.edu/policy transition to join FIU and DC to talk about, what policy the Biden-Harris administration should be, focusing on, or you think they should focus on, and hear from students who applied. So definitely check that out. It's going to be amazing. As amazing as this event, Eric is incredible. But thank you so much for joining, everybody, and be safe. Awesome. Thank you for joining, guys. I see some familiar faces. Any questions? You guys have some questions before you leave, maybe? I think we're good. Kamisha, would you have a question, maybe? Awesome. Eric, you are incredible, sir.
I took advantage of the remove button as called.
This was, I mean,
so
I
interesting.
wish we had more time.
Yeah, me too.
Because especially like Dr. Mora, I didn't know him, and I love